is working.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever it is that you are tuning in from. I am Garrett. I am hosting this series that we are doing on professional lighting by Light Panels. Thank you again to Light Panels for letting me do this with y'all. If you're new, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. Today we are talking about natural lighting, or what natural lighting actually is. If you have not yet watched the rest of the videos in this series, those are up on Light Panel's website as well as on their YouTube channel. Don't leave, stay here, watch this one. But after this, go back, take a look at some of the things that we've talked about, because we have gone over a variety of scenes and scene types and different applications that filmmakers can find themselves in, and how we can light, both theoretically and with certain fixtures like the Gemini lights from Light Panels, to achieve professional looks, dare I say cinematic. Generally, the quality of a production is determined primarily by the quality of the lighting, more so than the camera or the lenses or the gear or all of the fun things that you might have. Lighting is the thing that will make or break the overall look of your project. Now, before we can talk about how to light natural lighting, we should look at a scene that we filmed using natural light. For this, it's a little different than what we've done in the past. This is not a narrative scene from what would be a short film or a movie. We shot a fake commercial, and we'll get into the reasons why we did that in a second. But before we go any further, let's go ahead and watch that first, and then from there we can talk about how we did it.
As a semi-successful businessman, I didn't have time to run my business and run my business. These management tools I was using were expensive, time-sucking, and charged insane fees. Between the credit card, service, and subscription fees, I was paying like thousands of dollars a year. And that's when I found absolutely zero fees, not even credit card fees. And the suite of tools is so simple, I can run my business from anywhere. Saving time and money is too good to be true, you say? How do you explain all of this?
Daddy, can I have a ton?
In a bit, son. Daddy is working. Save your business some time and a lot of money and head over to .com.
So this is going to be what we are going to break down today. If at any point throughout this live stream, if you have questions, comments, concerns, there is a Q&A module here in the Zoom that you can punch into the Q&A. I will see those. If you don't have a Q&A module, you can't find that, you can also pop them into the chat. I will do my best as we go through this to answer questions as they come up. If I do miss it, I will make sure that we open up a Q&A at the end of this session, so then that way we can kind of dive in and break into some of the more specifics of questions that you may have. Now, before we can even get into how we lit this scene, there are a couple of principles that we need to talk about. There is a misconception that natural light and available light are the same thing, which they are not. Available light is filming without fixtures, and most of the time without modifiers. It is just taking the light that you have literally available to you and filming with that. Natural light is a style or an aesthetic. It is a choice. It is a way that we light to make things feel natural, to look natural. Our brains are constantly giving us the best version of the information that's coming in. And anybody who's taken a camera out and gone and filmed out in the bright outdoors will tell you that the camera doesn't lie to you in the same way that your brain does, and it gives you exactly what's out there. And harsh lighting with unattractive shadows does not make for very good filmmaking or very good commercials or very good documentary, whatever version of filmmaker you are, or whatever genre you are in. So before we get into anything, available light and natural light are different. They are not the same thing. There is an application for both. But when we talk about natural light, it's not just going out with a camera and filming wherever we happen to be. Okay, that's number one. The second principle that we need to talk about, which we will be discussing kind of the applications of over and over in this is when we shoot for natural light, when that is the aesthetic or the style that we're going for, natural light, we have three things. We want consistency, we want control, and we want contrast. Those are the things that we are trying to manage when we are lighting in a natural light environment. Okay, so consistency, control, contrast. Those are going to be coming up again throughout the rest of this. All right, but I want to break that down first, and now we can talk about actually how we go about doing that. And again, anybody with any questions, throw them in here. I would love to answer those as we go along, even if they're pseudo related. Hello from Paris, hello from Kosovo, France, California, Munich. I'm happy to see all of you here. Eric, I recognize your name. Welcome back. But again, let's break this down. Let's talk about what we did and how we did it. So the first thing that we should talk about today is what is called a grid. In this case, it is a fold-away butterfly. This is a 12-foot by 12-foot diffusion frame that we put overhead of our talent. Now, the nice thing with a butterfly or a fold-away frame like that is that it isn't actually 12 foot by 12 foot all the time, and it's relatively lightweight and easy to set up. This one is by Manfrotto Avenger. Fantastic setup. We used a full stop of diffusion on this just to even out our light, and again placed it directly overhead of our talent in order to maintain that level of control. Again, control being important here. The day that we filmed this, we actually had a mix of sun, clouds, and rain all within one day. And if we were just filming with available light,
How do you explain
we
all
wouldn't
this?
get this nice
Daddy,
consistent
can I have a
look
ton?
that we're seeing there, right? So the nice thing with a large diffusion overhead is that it is able to give us a much more consistent style of light and intensity of light than the surrounding area. And of course, having it in a 12 by 12 gives us enough space around our talent that we are then able to move the camera, move our set, move our talent in a way that makes sense, that we're not too confined. So that's the first thing we did. Before we did anything else, we needed to have control. And diffusion outdoors is always that. Outside of like Mad Max Fury Road, whenever you see people filmed outside, they will always have some form of diffusion between them and the sun. And if you remember in past episodes, we have talked about the relative surface area of a light fixture to our subject determines the behavior of that light. And while the sun is absolutely massive, it is so far away that in the sky, it looks super, super tiny. And because the relative surface area of the sun in relationship to our subject is very small, it creates very hard, very harsh light, meaning that the shadows are going to be very unattractive. So anytime you see people in TV, movies, music videos, wherever, outside, unless that is the look that they're going for, there will always, always be diffusion. Hello to Italy. Do we have a link to the spec video? Mike, we are going to be rewatching the video again, and after this will go online, so you will be able to see it again that way. But we will rewatch the video, I promise. Don't worry. Hello to Puerto Rico. It's good to have all of you here. So the first piece for lighting, when we're talking about outdoors, is diffusing that light, so that way we have control both in terms of the intensity of that light and the behavior of that light. First step before we do anything. The next piece that we have here, which comes to contrast, are negative fills. Now, where a fill or a bounce is going to add light onto our subjects, a negative is going to pull light away. And again, this goes to contrast. So for this, we used two different styles of negative fills. The first one you can see in the background of this shot, that is called duvetine, and it is a fabric roll that you can buy online. They're not very expensive, and this was a 6 foot by 8 foot duvetine roll. The next we had was a 4 foot by 4 foot frame, which you can see being assembled here, and we used that as a float. And what that means is that we were then able just to place it where we needed it to be, whether to block reflection on a phone screen or just to hide spill coming off of the back of a house wall. We're able to then position that 4x4 frame in a way to add contrast into the shots that we want when we want. And because it's so small,
I was paying like thousands of dollars a year. And that's when I found.
Okay, so the first is about control. The second, we have contrast, right? So the negative fill is just as important as diffusion, just as important as adding fixtures. It's not always about adding more light. It's about controlling the light that you have. And you can build contrast much more easily by pulling light away than you can just by adding more and more and more light. Okay, so the first is for our control. We have our butterfly, the 12x12 overhead. The second is contrast, which is going to be our negative fill. Now that takes care of our available light. Again, taking available light and turning it into natural light, right? To look the way that we want it to look. Touching back on control just briefly, it was cloudy for the first half of the day. Then partly cloudy to sunny for some of the day, and then it also rained, all in that day of shooting, which if we were just filming with available light, our stop of light, the intensity of that light is wildly different from shot to shot. The behavior of that light would be wildly different from shot to shot. And then just from the rain standpoint, just having that interfere with the set design and the art direction and the talent and all that would be a huge problem. So having that overhead diffusion really helped to balance out all of that light. So then that way, no matter what hit us throughout the day, the changes that we needed to make in camera were minimal. So now that we have taken care of our available light to sculpt it in a way that makes sense, now we will then use our fixtures to create the look and light that we want. So for this, we have our key light, which is actually this fixture here. And that key light is the Gemini 1x1 hard. This is an insane light. The name, Dorian, is duvetine, and we can spell that out for you, but duvetine is the name of the fabric. But this is the 1x1 hard. And the most incredible thing about this little 1x1 panel is that the sun was actually on the left side, camera left of our talent, but we used our key on the right. And the Gemini, being battery powered like this here, you can see it with the dual battery bracket running off of the Dionic Anton Bowers. We could run this light at 100% intensity off of battery power without issue. And this light is so bright. The 1x1 hard is 5 times brighter than the 1x1 soft. In all of our medium and close shots, you can see the key here on the camera right. All of our medium to close shots, we actually had to dial the Gemini down from 100% to 75% because the intensity was actually too hot for the style of the aesthetic that we were going for. So that light is so bright and so color accurate that I was able to key opposite the sun and still turn the light down in order to get this look here. So you can see left side of the face to right side of the face camera wise, right? We have a good stop and a half of contrast there. We have this really pleasing key light coming kind of up from the top camera right. We can see that that negative fill is really working here on the cheekbone there on the camera left. And this is a very controlled, very aesthetically pleasing style of shooting, okay? Now, if you don't have a 1x1 Gemini hard, you can use other fixtures to get the equivalent output. One of the things that I really like about the Light Panels fixtures, and it's both true of their Gemini and Astra families, is that I can trust the readout on the light. I cannot tell you how many times I have worked with fixtures where I need to make sure that I get my spectrometer or my color meter out to verify that the color that that light is putting out is in fact what that light reads. These are so accurate, I actually never have to color meter the lights themselves because I know that when I dial them in, they're exactly what they need to be. So whether you're using anything in the Astra line or anything in the Gemini line, I would then double up fixtures. So if you had a 1x1 soft or two 1x1 softs, you could double those up. Same with the Astra 6Xs. You can stack those lights in a way to get you that same level of output this fixture does, but you can be sure that any of the light panel fixtures are going to give you that color accuracy. Color accuracy is something we talked a lot about in some of the previous episodes, so I'm not going to harp on it too much in this one. But especially when it comes to rendering skin tones and making people look their best, you really need to make sure that the accuracy of that light that's coming out matches what you're putting in with your camera. Now, if you're working with higher end cinema cameras that shoot in true RAW, white balance is a little less important because we can have a little bit more latitude and control over that in post. But if you're not filming in RAW, if you're filming in ProRes, or you're filming in compressed, H.264, H.265, any of the standard codecs and wrappers that you would normally find in most cameras, dialing in that color control is paramount to making people look alive and healthy and good and not green and yellow and sickly. Jeremy says, how do you avoid shadows from the 12 by on the grass when zooming out? We're going to get into the zooming out in just a second. That is a fantastic question. And truthfully, the main answer is it is the camera position. And then, of course, the way that we frame that against our camera. But we'll talk about the wide shots in just a second. But that is a fantastic question. Pauline says, what's the difference in terms of T-stops between negative fill and your key light? So T-stops are going to be a little bit less dramatic. So it's about a stop and a half of f-stop. It's about a stop in T-stop. Now, that said, if you work with false color, which is another thing that we've talked about in episodes past, easiest way to check your exposure, especially if you create manual keys, you can then very quickly and easily identify how much intensity from one side of the face to the other side of the face you have. All of the small HD monitors, which are the hands down the best production monitors that you'll use, all have false color built into them, both with RE style false color and full spectrum false color. So any of that will work. If you're using a color meter, a spectrometer, or a light meter, and you have a spot read that you can get on it, you can then just read from one side of the face to the other. But in general, a pleasing contrast from one side to the other is going to be about a single T-stop. Di says, can you fill the entire 12 by 12 grid with the Gemini 1x1 soft and still have enough output on the other side of the character, or is that too much stop loss? Matthias, great question. So for that, it's not as much about the stop loss as much as it is about the spread. So a couple of episodes ago, we did a documentary style interview inside where we also use this 12 by grid. And really, it's more of the surface area than the intensity. But for that one, we just put a dual bracket together and we took two of these 1x1 Geminis and put them together just to give us a larger surface area source to start with. So that way it's not so beam focused in the middle of a 12 by, because 12 bys are massive, massive surface areas. I would confidently put a 6-foot in front of this, and you could probably even get away with an 8-foot. But with a 12-foot, I think that you're probably going to want more surface area of the initial fixture to push the behavior of light through that you're looking for. How do I know which diffusion to use? Alvin, great question. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do it. So there's like muslin, unbleached muslin, magic cloth, and then you can just get diffusion in varying stops. Same with magic cloth, you can get those in varying stops. How much you choose to use is entirely up to you. When I'm filming outdoors like this, I'll generally choose to use one full stop, whether that's just diffusion or magic cloth, or I will just use an unbleached muslin. Unbleached muslin is going to stop down a ton more light coming through than either your magic cloth or your diffusion will. But really, it depends on the environment that you're in. For us, because we were kind of playing in and out of clouds, I didn't need something as intense as an unbleached muslin. I just knew that a one-stop diffusion would give me enough that it'd balance out the inconsistencies of the sky around me. Matthias, soft or hard for the 8x8 and the 12x12? For the 12x12, I would go hard all the way. The 1x1 softs already give you a really nice diffused light, where I wouldn't then feel the need to have to add any additional diffusion to it to get the behavior out that I'd want. The only time that I'd push a soft through a larger frame is if I would be using something like a quarter stop or a half stop of like a magic cloth, because I don't need the behavior to change as much as just altering the surface area of the fixture itself. So for the 12 by 12, 1x1 hards all the way. For a 6x6 and a 4x4, you could probably get away with the softs, but again, it would just depend on what cloth you're putting over the front of it. I just wouldn't stop down a full stop with the softs. I don't think that that's necessary for most times. Would a highlight be appropriate in this situation? Yeah, so depending on how you light, we're going to talk a little bit about the edge light that we used here, but yes, you absolutely could. And really what it comes down to, as with everything else, and we've talked about this in previous episodes too, is how do you, the filmmaker, you, the cinematographer or director or what have you, how do you want the audience to feel about the thing that they're watching, right? Because everything that we are doing is driven by tone and emotion. And so if I want somebody to feel like the environment that they're in is scary, or if I want somebody to feel like the environment that they're in is safe or happy or sad, those things are going to determine what fixtures I use and how I use them to create a desired end result. Because again, 9 times out of 10, the difference between a movie feeling like a movie or a commercial feeling like a commercial versus like a home film isn't really about anything other than the lighting. And we need to make our lighting choices from a place of tone and emotion long before we make lighting choices based on what we're confined to, because that's how we make this stuff work. Richard, yeah, so we've showed some examples of it at the beginning. We're going to show more examples of it here in a minute. I was just taking some time to answer some questions here from some of the folks. Did you have any issues seeing the shadow from the 12 by 12 overhead on the grass behind your talent? Thomas, great question. We'll get a little bit more into this when we get into the wide shot. For us, we were lucky enough to be on a semi-cloudy day, and we were more cloudy in the morning. And knowing that, I chose to shoot the wide shots first because the clouds were able to give us a little bit of that diffusion help there. The way that you would avoid seeing that frame primarily, especially if you're shooting on very sunny days and you're trying to get that diffusion, just comes into the camera shots that we're using and the angles that we're shooting at. So you'll see here in the wide shots, we're actually very low to the ground on the Dana dolly as we do our pull back. And that's very intentional because I'm trying to minimize as much of the grass that we can see, so that way we don't see those shadows. If I brought the camera up to eye level or high and brought it down, you would then very quickly be able to see much more pronounced frame shadows than you otherwise would. So when you're working with this stuff, it's very important to think about what your camera angles are and what your shot types are, because those are the things that are really going to help you avoid seeing obvious shadows. That said, you probably will find those frame shadows in a lot of your favorite movies and shows. Primarily, audiences are looking at eyes and they're looking at faces, and most everything else is forgivable. But if you're really looking for it, I'm sure you can find it. Okay, real quick, one last one here. If you don't have the budget to purchase some of the light diffusion and control options that you've mentioned, are there home-based options that you can use? Sheets, white, black, boards? Yes, absolutely. So if you can't afford a 12 by 12 butterfly with a full stop of diffusion on it, totally understand that's not a problem. I've seen a lot of DIY done with PVC pipe, which is just like standard plumbing plastic piping. And then, yeah, using like solid white sheets, like a white sheet, like a bed sheet. If you got like a king sized bed sheet from Target and you wrapped and duct taped it around PVC pipe, you could probably build something close to that. It'd probably be closer to like an 8x8, but you could get something close to a large frame like that for under $20. So if you don't have that for that, absolutely. If you can't buy Duvetine, Duvetine's not that expensive, but if you can't buy Duvetine, again, black bed sheets are fantastic. You can go to a fabric or craft store and also just get rolls of fabric as well. Those are all things that you can do. These are all very easily done to DIY. And it's better to have a DIY option to get the light control that you have than to say, well, I can't afford a frame or I can't afford, you know, what have you, and then just try to work with available light. Natural light will always be better. So now We've talked about control with the frame. We've now talked about the contrast with the negative fill. We've talked about our key light, which is our 1x1. Keep the questions coming. I just want to keep this rolling, and I'll come back to your questions as well. The last thing is a hair light, also known as an edge light, a rim light, a crown light, a cut light. A lot of different names for this style of light, and they all do slightly different things, but by and large, edge lights are kind of what we call them. And what we used for that is the new Quasar Science double rainbow. Now we use the 4-foot configuration for this, and it is a tube style LED light that has 2 rows of pixels on it. The nice thing with the double rainbow is it has a significant output. Nothing like the Gemini, but for what we needed it for, I just needed it to separate my talent from the background that's behind them. Edge lights are best done when they're unnoticed. The audience shouldn't necessarily see them, but they will absolutely notice if the edges of our talent are falling into the background behind. And especially because everything is so soft and so diffused, I really needed to have a crispy edge right around my talent to really keep them off of the grass behind them. And if you look in this freeze frame here, if you look around the ears, and if you look behind the hair on the head and the top of the collar around each side of the neck, you'll see that that is just slightly brighter than everything else. And that's done by this Quasar tube that we're using here. And that's only to pull my subject away from my background. We've talked about this in previous episodes. Again, if you haven't watched those, please go watch those because we go in depth about all of that. It shouldn't be enough that unless it's a stylistic choice, you see an edge light or a hair light. But it is always so important to make sure that your foreground, midground, and background are separate elements, are separate layers, because we want our audience to focus exactly on the thing that we want them to see and not get distracted by everything else or fall into everything else, okay? So the Quasar double rainbow is a fantastic fixture. A tube light and the behavior of that light is wildly different from a panel light. Very different applications for those. And again, this was too bright at 100%, so we docked it down to 75%, and it still was a very obvious key. Whereas with the double rainbow, we had that at 100% intensity at 5600 Kelvin, and it was just enough to give us exactly what we needed to pull our foreground off of our background. Okay, so that is our control, that is our contrast, that is our key, that is our fill, that is our consistency. That is how we approach lighting. And it's not just this setup, it's whatever setup you're looking to light. Those principles are the same. Okay, so now before we go any further, I want to break down a couple of these shots just so that way you can see the way that they look and how that then plays out. So let's start with this one that we were just looking at here. So if I come here, and I know the question or the contrast is a little different on the iPad than everything else, but if we look here, we can very quickly identify that our key light, our main source of light, is coming across the talent's face here, right? Our hottest spot, our brightest point, is camera right above the eye, right? That is where we are most bright. In contrast to that, we are darkest on the face down here, right? And that is that duvetine that's sitting just off of camera. And when I say just off of camera, I mean it is just hanging off of camera right there. And that is pulling light away from my subject's face. And you can see here then this cheekbone here, we're getting a little bit more light coming back through. That's coming off of the back side of this house that's on the camera left. This house here is a beige color and it's bringing light back forward. But our duvetine is kind of doing double time here, acting as both a negative fill and a flag. But I like this little bit of separation that we're getting there on the face, so we're keeping that there. Now, if you look at the chest real quick here of our talent, you'll see that we actually have a defined shadow coming off of this shirt, right? And we can see the defined shadow here on the chest, and we can see the defined shadow here on the collar, right? That gives us the appearance or the impression of bright sunlight, right? Because again, sunlight naturally is a hard light source, but because this is my key, not the sun, right? This is the Gemini 1x1 hard. I'm able to get the behavior here that I want to have, right? Where we don't have any unattractive shadows coming off of the neck. We don't have any unattractive shadows coming off of the nose. We don't have any unattractive shadows pocketing under the eyes. Excuse me. But we do get a nice hard line here, here, and here, which helps for our audience to read this as though it is bright sunshine, when in actuality, it was a very kind of gloomy day. And again, partway through the shoot, it rained, right? The other way that we sell the sunshine is in our color grade, by grading it warm, by adding the sprinkler sound, the birds in the background. We can make it feel as though it's a really nice sunny day, and the audience will never know that it was mostly cloudy and it rained partway through, right? Because we have that control. We're able to create that look. Now, going to one of the comments earlier, asking about this shot here and where we put the frame and all of that there. The frame would have ended about here and about here. We would have seen the stands for the frame, maybe a little wider than that, but they absolutely would be in the shot. So for that, and this is true of any shoot prep, you should always know the path and the trajectory of the sun throughout the day when you're shooting outdoors, both in terms of color temperature and of course in terms of direction and behavior. And I knew that we were going to be most cloudy in the day. And I also knew that the sun in the morning is about over here. And because of that, so Liam, the categories are consistency, control, and contrast. And then of course we add our fill and edge light as needed. But those are the three when we're talking about shooting natural light here. So I knew that our sun was going to be right over here, outside of frame up here in the morning. And I also knew it was going to be most cloudy. And because of that, we adjusted our shooting schedule to make sure that we shot the wide shots first, because I could rely on the clouds more consistently in the morning. But then also because the sun was so far to the side of my talent in the morning, I could take that 12x12 frame, and instead of being overhead, I could kick it to the side, kind of at a 45-degree angle, and send it up, So then that way I knew that we'd still get the diffusion between the sun and my talent, right, without having to be overhead. And I'd still get that without having the shadows that we were talking about earlier. There's a great app for iOS. It's probably for Android too, called Sun Tracer. And it's a great augmented reality app where you can put in your time and date, and from your location where you are, you can use the camera and it will show you the path of the sun and the intensity of the sun throughout the day. Fantastic app. I use it for shoot prep all of the time. But because I knew where the sun was going to be and I knew what the weather for my day was going to be, I could plan my shots accordingly to make sure that this shot didn't have egregious shadows from my frame on the floor, but still could get that behavior the way that I wanted. Now for this shot, again, you can see if I punch in here, my key is still coming from camera right, even though the sun is camera left. And that is still because of this 1x1 Gemini. Now, of course, I needed to back it up for this frame, and because I backed it up, I increased the intensity. So we went from that 75% that we used for the rest of the shoot, and in this wide shot, we used it at 100%. But you can see here, even competing with the sun on a cloudy day, I'm still able to get a very defined key on this half of my talent compared to what my negative fill is doing, pulling light off of that side of my talent. So we didn't do multiple setups throughout the day, but we did adjust light as needed. Now let's break down how things were set up, because of course that is one of the important things before we move on here. So if we come here, you can see here, we have our red Komodo, which is what we shot this with. We put it on a Dana dolly, because one of the big jokes in this ad, of course, is that the dad is sitting in the kid's pool, and we don't want that revealed to be till the end. So we start with a real close up, and we end with a really wide shot, right? That's how the progression of this works. And a Dana dolly makes it super easy to move my camera around quite simply. So talent sitting in the pool here, we have our red Komodo and we have our Dana dolly, and we're doing pulls the entire time. We did also shoot a couple stationaries, which are in this as well. But everything except for the cutaways was all still on the Dana dolly. We just banana clipped or A-clamped the shuttle down to the Dana dolly and used those for our stationaries. and then switched over to the Sockler Flowtech sticks when we wanted to get the like over the shoulder shot on the phone, or the cutaway of holding up the phone to screen there. Okay, so the next thing that we then put up was this 12 by 12 grid, which is what we have here with one stop of diffusion. And we put that on overhead just with 2 standard combo stands, nothing crazy, super easy. Anytime you put anything around or over talent, make sure you bag it down, because the last thing we want to do is to have stuff fall on our talent. This is about kind of the general positioning of our Gemini 1x1 hard, which was our key light for this. So we're probably at about 4 to 5 feet away from them for most of this stuff, except of course for our final shot, or the wide shot, which we kind of kicked it back to about 8 to 10 feet away from them there. And then this is kind of the overall look here. So you can see here, this is our 6x8 duvetine that we got here. This is what's acting as that negative fill. The larger the surface area of your negative fill, just like with your diffusion or your bounce, the more of an effect it's going to have on your subject. So we had this again about 4 feet away from our talent, and we had that as a 6x8, which was enough to pull that light off. This here is our edge light, which is that double rainbow 4-foot. Fantastic fixture, especially when you need it for that type of an application. This is our float, which is that 4x4 frame that I was referencing earlier. We would fly that in for like the cutaways, so that way there wasn't reflection or glare on the glass of the phone. We used it for the AC who was pulling focus to make sure that they could clearly see the monitor. And we just allowed that to be where we needed it to be if we needed to add contrast or pull things away in any particular shot. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of that there. Here's an example, by the way, of one of the cutaways, right? So here's a cutaway here. The duvetine is sitting out over here. That's the negative fill there. Our key light is still kind of coming from this way across, which is why you can see this really nicely across our subject's face there, right? We have this, the difference between in front of the ear and behind the ear. We have a good 2.5 stops there, so that's great. And then of course our focal point here is on the phone. And then we just kind of kicked the little floaty behind just to give it a little bit of movement, a little bit of, interest, visual interest. But that's that. And the nice thing about when you are able to light like that, you are then able to have incredible amounts of control, right? So again, going back to Liam's question from earlier, consistency, control, and contrast. I'll give you an interesting little tidbit here. The kid that we had in the final shot, the reveal, which is the big joke, right? That's the way that we want that thing to end. The kid wasn't available that day. And since everything was volunteer and we were just shooting a spec, I had to wait to get the kid until yesterday. And we then ended up filming the kid on a blue screen yesterday, going through like that. Where we had the diffusion overhead, we had the blue panel behind them. I then brought in that same key with the 1x1 there, pulled it off a little further away from them because it was a much sunnier day that day, but we got the light to behave in the same way because we had consistency, we had control, and we had contrast. If I didn't have those when we filmed on the day, filming our principal on a cloudy day where it rained, and then filming our pickups on a day where it was bright and sunny, we wouldn't be able to color match those or get the light to behave in a way that it would be believable that that kid would be in the shot. Now, that's actually one of the things that we're talking about in the next live stream, is how to light for green screen or blue screen, and how to use the Gemini fixtures in our compositing to make things believable for the end environment that they're in. So if you've not yet registered for the next live stream, please go on to Light Panel's website, register for that next one. We're doing an HBO style intro. We're working with a whole bunch of cool partners on that one. But we're making a sweet intro, think like True Detective, Euphoria, a lot of those really cool like HBO style shows. We're creating an intro sequence, and we're doing it entirely with green screen and compositing. So if you're interested in that and how to light for green screen and how to composite and make things look really cool and interesting, that's what we're doing. next month there. They just threw a link up in the chat for that. Jeremy says, would having a key go through a 6X look too lit or soft for a bright sunny day scenario? So here's the funny thing, Jeremy, about light behavior. The only people who would obviously notice light behavior being incorrect are the people that are in this live stream. I would see it, you would see it, the other folks here would see it, but your general audience never once notices, hey, this American Western has a duel that's taking place at high noon in the bright sun. All of the close-up shots have really nice, soft controlled lighting. Nobody notices that. And if you want to do a fun experiment, next time you watch a movie or a show, watch how different the wide shot light is from the close-up shots, because I guarantee you the close-up shot lights are going to be much more diffused than anything in a wide or an extreme wide. So to answer your question, it doesn't matter because nobody cares. The thing is with natural light, and this is where that conflation between natural light and available light is, people want to look their best, always, constantly. The way that they're lit, the way that they look, everything. That's what natural light does. Available light doesn't make people look their best. It makes them look where they actually are and how it actually is. A lot of documentaries use available light just because they don't have the control and they need the speed, right? So you're trading one for the other. But nobody notices and nobody cares. I mean, the thing is that when it comes to diffusion, larger is always better, right? If you're trying to diffuse light, the surface area of your fixture should be as wide as possible. The surface area of your diffusion should be as wide as possible. The surface area of your negative should be as wide as possible, because that's going to give you that really nice, soft, even behavior that you wouldn't get otherwise. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and watch this spot one more time. I know Richard was asking for it. Okay, cool. We're going to watch this one more time. Pay attention though. Look at the contrast. Look at the control. The thing is that the light throughout this shoot in the background varies because we're outside, and sometimes it's sunnier and sometimes it's cloudier and sometimes it's raining, right? Fortunately, we used a sprinkler in the background, which kind of gave us a little bit of water as a prop there, but pay attention to those things. Take a look at those things. See what the edge light is doing. See what that 1x1 hard is doing for our key light. Know that it's opposite the sun, which is crazy incredible. I wasn't expecting to have to dim that fixture down, but pay attention to those things. And when it's done, I'll open it up for Q&A and we can talk a little bit about more of the specifics of things that you guys want to talk about. So let's watch it one more time here.
As a semi-successful businessman, I didn't have time to run my business and run my business. These management tools I was using were expensive, time-sucking, and charged insane fees. Between the credit card, service, and subscription fees, I was paying like thousands of dollars a year. And that's when I found absolutely zero fees, not even credit card fees. And the suite of tools is so simple, I can run my business from anywhere. Saving time and money is too good to be true, you say? How do you explain all this?
Daddy, can I have a ton?
In a bit, son. Daddy is working. Save your business some time and a lot of money and head over to .com.
Now, I know Eric's going to ask, because Eric has been kind enough to ask every time. I am going to be posting this stuff on my Instagram as well. I know that Zoom kind of messes with the color a little bit, so it's not always, it looks different to me than it does for you. So if you guys do want to see some of the behind the scenes footage, some of the behind the scenes photos, some of the color grading, the way that the thing actually looks, go over and follow me on Instagram. See, Eric, I got you. Go ahead and go over and follow me on Instagram. You can find me at Garrett Salmons. It's just my name. And that's where I post a whole bunch of stuff, not just necessarily from this shoot, but of course from other shoots and things that I'm doing there. Simon was kind enough to put that in the chat. So there you go. Go follow me on Instagram. If you have questions, even beyond today, feel free to DM me on Instagram. You can subscribe to me on YouTube. I make videos about questions that people send me. So I'd love to continue to engage with you guys there. But as we wrap this up, those are kind of the main principles of how we go about doing this stuff, whether you are using the same types of modifiers that I am, or if you're using the exact same fixture that I am, doesn't matter. The principles are what are important. Any of the fixtures that you can get from light panels are going to be able to perform at an extremely high and accurate level. I highly recommend this light because you need less fixtures. This thing is an insanely cool light. I use it for pretty much everything that I shoot now. But if you're starting with Astras are great. If you're working with some of the Gemini soft stuff, they're awesome lights. I mean, the Gemini 2x1 is still an industry standard fixture for a reason. They're unbelievable fixtures. Let's get into some of these here. Would using a bounce instead of a 1x1 hard give the same results? Great question, and no. So couple things. When we talk about bounce, just like with diffusion, there are a bunch of different kinds of bounce. So there's ultra bounce, there's beadboard, there's foam core, there's all sorts of different kinds of bounce that you can use, and they all behave a little bit differently in the way that they refract light, the way that it bounces that light off. The nice thing with bounce is it will always give you a consistently soft look, but a bounce is completely dependent on the intensity of the light that is being pushed onto it. So for us, we would be using the sun. And as you can see in the shots that we were working with, this was able to be brighter than the sun to be used as a key. Where if I was bouncing the sun, it would never be brighter. And in fact, it would usually be slightly dimmer. So bounces are great for fill lights if you're trying to push fill, but rarely would they work as a key. You will see sometimes people using different modifiers as keys, things like reflectors, whether they're silver or gold reflectors. Those can be, because that's more of a mirror finish than something that's kind of a traditional white. But even then, it's only going to be bouncing the intensity of the thing that's coming onto it. In some of the other episodes, we've talked about things like book lights and other ways that we can use bounce as fill or use bounce as key in conjunction with other fixtures. But generally, a bounce is much more of a fill than it would be a key. Alvin, so glad you're here, buddy. Thanks for tuning in from Spain. How do we feel about using a different brand of lights together in a shoot as far as color control? Great question. So this is where a spectrometer or a color meter is paramount. Okay. I know that I can trust this fixture. I know that I can trust a light panels fixture because for the first 3 years of me using them, I would get color reads on them to make sure that they were putting out what I wanted. Now that I've used them long enough, I know that they're putting out exactly what I want. But if I'm going to introduce a different brand of fixture in conjunction with some of the light panel stuff that I have, I would absolutely have to make sure that I know the color that's coming off of those lights. And the nice thing is that most of those lights aren't going to be as accurate or as consistent. But what I can do is I can make sure that I can color match this perfectly to that light. So if I'm using a light that has inferior color, right? So let's say that there's tint or some sort of color cast. So it's casting green or it's casting magenta, or it's a little too warm or a little too cool for the readout that it is. That's fine, because I can control this light with tint and offset, green, magenta, warm, and cool. And I can dial this light in perfectly to whatever another fixture would give you. So when I am in a setting that I am using a variety of fixtures, I will get a read off of a particular fixture and then color match this to that, and then color match the camera to them both. And that's the way that I would use them both together, because I can trust this light. I can't necessarily trust other LED fixtures in particular. Okay, so we got just like time for 1 or 2 more questions. If you guys have any other comments, questions, or concerns, now would be the time, because I've got just a few more minutes here. Miles, not a problem. Make sure you tune into the next one here. I'm always happy to answer questions, to create content that you guys want to see. And I try my best, of course, to relay that content in the easiest, most digestible way possible. Real quick here, the last one that I wanted to just touch on real fast here is this shot, just because I think this shot's hilarious. So if we come here, this is that final shot where the text comes up over screen. So for this, and this is kind of getting a little bit into what we're going to be talking about in the next session, but when we talk about compositing, right? Our little boy here is not actually in this shot. And in order to be able to do this, right? So the plate that we shot, this flamingo is what is in hard focus. That was what was shot. Our main subject was soft. But to get this guy believably in this scene, I needed to make sure that I shot him tack sharp. So I shot him completely sharp, brought that into After Effects, composited him into that space, and then used camera lens blur and then matched the intensity of the blur that was on my main subject onto that subject. Never, ever, 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 ever film anything when you're compositing blue screen or green screen, fuzzy or soft or blurry or shallow depth of field. You want a very deep depth of field. You want everything to be tack sharp because we can always make things fuzzy. We cannot always bring things back. Mike, happy to help. Vincent, what would be your very light setup in the mountains, for example? Ooh, great question. So if you're doing that kind of stuff, so there is a light that Light Panels makes called the Lycos Plus. It uses the same LED diodes as the Astra 6X, but it's basically like a quarter panel. It's about this big of a fixture. But if you know anything about the Astra 6X, it's an insanely bright light. And again, like with the rest of Light Panels products, I can trust the intensity of that light. That light, the Lycos Plus, also happens to be bicolor and fully scalable bicolor. So I'm able to, if we're shooting in a sunset scene, I can really warm that up. If we're shooting in a mixed light scene, I can put it somewhere neutral. And I can also, of course, go all the way to the 5600 Kelvin as well. Insanely bright, insanely lightweight. They run off of NPF batteries. So you take a couple batteries with you, you're going to get a lot of light out of it. If you're backpacking and you're in the mountains, that is a fantastic fixture. It's going to get you way more bang for your buck in a light, compact way of doing it. Again, I threw a little link in the chat to the Lycos Plus lights. If there are no other comments, questions, or concerns today, the only things that I want you to take away with you today are available light is different from natural light. We need to stop the internet culture of thinking that natural light is available light. They're totally different things. And when you can, use natural light, shoot natural light, create natural light every time over available light. We as filmmakers make the choices and make the decisions to create the looks and feelings that we want to make. That is the number one thing. And the last thing is get yourself a fixture, whatever your budget can afford, that is going to be the most versatile light that it can be, right? That's what's so incredible about this light, is that it's full RGB. It is full bicolor with tint correction. It has gel libraries built into it. It has effects built into it. And it is so stinking bright, I can use it in environments that I would never normally be able to use a panel style light because the intensity is so high. Always buy the brightest, most accurate light your budget can afford. And whether you're starting with a Lycos Plus, whether you're starting with an Astra, whether it's any one in the Astra family, the 6X being kind of the flagship, or you're moving into the Gemini stuff, bright, accurate lights make incredible movies, beginning, middle, and end. Okay. Last question here, and then we're going here. Alvin says, how do you work continuity of natural light in an entire film? Great question. So behavior of light is something we have control over, right? That's why we're using the giant diffusion frames. So I know I can get the light to behave the way that I want to at all times. Big, nice, soft, diffused light. Now, in terms of exposure, this is where we get back into reading false color, or if you're using a light meter, those are the things that are then going to make it consistent throughout. I have a video on my YouTube channel, which again, you go to youtube.com/GarrettSammons. That's my YouTube channel. I have a video on false color about this very topic. But generally, when you're reading false color, you want skin tones to fall into this about 60 IRE. That's a scale of 1 to 100. That's for more pale complexion people. If you're getting into darker complexion folks, that's going to be somewhere around 45. But in that range there, that is where you always want skin tones to be, no matter what. Audiences always first look for eyes, secondly look for faces. If they're focused on eyes and they're focused on faces, they're paying far less attention to everything else. So if you're getting constant exposure correctly on faces for your whole movie, when you're filming outdoors, so much of the rest of it is forgivable. But if we mess this up and this is inconsistent in terms of our exposure, it's going to be very, very noticeable. So light behavior and light exposure. Those are the two things that you want control over. Control, consistency, contrast. That's it when it comes to shooting natural light. Okay. With that said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I always appreciate talking to all of you. Make sure you register for the one that's happening next month, where we talk about compositing and green screen lighting. Follow Light Panels on YouTube, follow them on their website, follow me on Instagram and YouTube, and I will see you all next month. Have a good one.